Yep. Margaret from Flint, Michigan, had written in, gone to financialhq.com and asked a question. Her question was this, and it ties in real well with our continuing conversation on longevity as well as we jump into asset allocation. Question was, why do I need my savings to last to age 100 if my average lifespan is much shorter? Margaret's question is a good one because I think a lot of people in the planning industry will only plan for assets to last based on a life expectancy. There was actually a book written years ago by a Stanford professor who had kind of illustrated the folly of planning using averages. And one of the stories that he shared in the book was the tale of the statistician who drowns crossing a river with an average depth of only 3 feet.
Yeah, there's danger in using averages.
That's right. Now, the rub, of course, with that is that the stream was shallow near the shore, but it was 12 feet deep in the middle.
That's right.
So that's why he drowned. And ultimately, we see the same thing when we look at longevity planning and trying to address retirement income. Think about this. If you are 65 today, let's just say you and your spouse are 65 years old, there is a 50% chance that one of you will live until age 90.
To the chance of a coin toss.
That's right. There's about a 25% chance that one of you will live to age 95. And so that's the reason why it is that you've got to look at planning to age 100 at least, possibly longer. Because, if you look at the 50% side of things, 50% of couples, won't make it to age 90, but 50% will.
That's right.
And we don't know who's going to last that long.
Right.
We don't know when the Grim Reaper is going to knock on our door.
Yep. And like we always say, again, hope for the best, but plan for the worst. And living long is not a bad thing. That's exciting.
Right.
But you definitely need to plan accordingly, make those assets last as long as you possibly can.
And that's the key to it. And I think that jumps right into our conversation on asset allocation.
Yep.
And, exactly what is it, Brent? How is it that you want to look at asset allocation? How do you want to think about it? What are some of the key, important elements to it?
Yep, sure. Glad to, Mark. And asset allocation can get a little bit blurry because some people will also just assume that means diversification. And the reality is that they're kind of intertwined. They're two separate items, and they work in coordination with one another. But the asset allocation risk that we want to talk about today is pretty simple. So let's talk about it from a high level, Mark, and then we can give some examples. But for a lot of folks, they've heard what's called the rule of 100, which kind of goes in tune with Margaret's question there. And the rule of 100 basically says that to divvy up your assets in a manner that gives you the greatest chance for making them last, if you are age 100, take 100 minus your age, whatever that number is, that's the percentage that should be invested in stocks. So let's use an example. If you're a 30-year-old individual, the rule of 100 says take 100 minus your age of 30. That leaves you 70%. So 70% of your assets ought to be invested in stocks. If you're a 70-year-old, you take 100 minus 70. That tells you 30% of your assets ought to be invested in stocks. The problem with that simple rudimentary rule is that it doesn't take into a couple of other key factors, one of which is an individual's risk tolerance, their investable assets, their net worth, their income, their tax scenario, and there's a lot of other factors that need to come into play when you're trying to figure out how do I allocate my investments and my holdings. In addition to that, it's much more complicated than that because you can't just say, well, I'll just go out and buy a few bonds and a few stocks based on the ratio you just gave me and I'll call it good. There's so many other things to consider. There's different types of bonds, different types of stocks. There's different classifications. There's different asset classes. There's mid-cap stocks and small caps and growth and income. And so there's so many more things to consider other than just, well, I'll just get the ratio right.
Right. And I think that there's a lot of asset classes, and that rule of thumb is kind of a good starting point, I think, to at least start the conversation with. But, in terms of different types of asset classes, you'd be looking at cash, you're looking at fixed interest securities, stocks, commodities, which might include precious metals, energy, and that sort of thing. You'd also factor in real estate, as well as insurance products, which may include annuities, life insurance, and that sort of thing. Now, on a more exotic scenario, you might be looking at derivatives or foreign currencies or different venture capital things that you could be looking at, which is, probably a little bit out of the realm of the average retiree. So, I mean, that's part of the thing that we have to consider. And I know that you always like to use analogies when we look at asset classes and asset allocations. Brent, share that with us.
Sure. This is Brent Enders and Mark Mersman at America's Financial Headquarters. Mark, the question you just posed is good, and to share a couple of analogies here, I'd love to. One of the stories we always like to tell is when you're looking at asset allocation and diversifying your assets amongst different classes, the trap that a lot of investors fall into is they put all their eggs in one basket. And we've all been taught that, that's not safe and we shouldn't do it, but yet it happens. Sometimes it happens because it's simple. So Mark, this toolbox analogy that I like to share, consider this, at your house, in your toolbox, most people have a wide variety of tools. They have hammers, screwdrivers, wrenches, different things to do different jobs around the house. And when you consider your investments, you need to consider it in the same fashion. You can't accomplish everything you need to accomplish with one tool. At home when you're doing chores. Same holds true with your investments in your assets. You can't accomplish everything you need to by just investing in one thing or one asset class, because some asset classes and some investments are meant to do certain things but not others. So some investments are meant to be more growth oriented, some are meant to be more income oriented, some are meant to be more tax efficient than others.
Sure.
So you really need kind of a wide variety. So when you're looking at your assets and your investments, always remember that you need a variety of tools to accomplish certain jobs.
I think there are a few dangers too, Brent, because you're pointing out tools, and I don't claim to be a handy guy whatsoever. But I'm smart enough to know that when I look at a toolbox, there are certain things that I don't know about, and I'm not familiar exactly with their names. But there's some dangers in, if you are being approached by a financial professional, and the only tool that they decide to show you is a hammer, there may be problems there, because that hammer is not going to accomplish every single job.
Your radar should go up.
And likewise, if a financial professional is telling you that, these 3 tools are the worst things ever, you should never, ever, ever consider using them, I'll contend that they may be, I guess, given some poor advice, because maybe it is that they don't understand how to use that tool. Maybe it is that they don't, understand all of the inner workings of it and when to apply it to what type of job.
They might not be properly licensed to help you in that area.
That's exactly right. And so I think it's important as you are looking at, what tools to have in your toolbox, you're careful as to, what handyman's giving you the advice.